This is really a great opportunity. It's not often that we get a chance to speak in Virginia, and it's not necessarily that Virginia doesn't need to be talked about right to work, but Virginia is so far ahead of other states when it comes to providing freedom and liberty in America's workplace than lots of other states around the country. And so it's a pleasure for me to be here and to share with you a little bit about our mission at Right to Work and what it means from a personal liberty standpoint. Let me take you back to 2003. 2003 was kind of an interesting year politically. It was a year where things went, I guess, kind of well or not kind of well, but in Illinois, things got very exciting for a guy by the name of Rod Blagojevich. Does anyone remember that name, Rod Blagojevich? He had really good hair. I was envious. Son of a gun. You know, I don't have really good hair. He had really good hair. At least he thought he did, you know. But Rod Blagojevich had just come off a very big political victory, and he was really, really riding high. And one of the biggest contributors to Rod Blagojevich that year was the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU. They had given literally millions of dollars to Blagojevich's run for governor. But when it was all said and done and the victory balloons had been cleaned up and the confetti had been swept away, the SEIU came back to Governor Blagojevich and said, "You know what, sir? We have something we'd like you to do for us." And Rod Blagojevich did then in 2003 what this President of the United States says he can do now with a pen and a cell phone. He can start signing pieces of paper that give unilateral power to friends of his. And that's what he did. He signed an executive order shortly after taking the oath of office. And this executive order, believe it or not, allowed the Service Employees International Union to take money from people that were providing personal health care to their own family members. Let me now introduce a lady by the name of Pamela Harris and a lady by the name of Susan Watts. Two women who came to the National Right to Work Foundation after this Rod Blagojevich executive order had threatened them with the requirement that they take some of the money that their children were getting for their care in their homes and give it to the Service Employees International Union as a condition of taking care of their own children. Pam Harris's son Joshua is 25 years old. He's developmentally disabled, can't take care of himself. In Illinois, they have a program called Home Help Program, which allows parents to take care of their children at home, and they get a Medicaid stipend for that purpose. It's means tested. You know, you can argue about whether or not the government should be involved in this or not, but it's clearly more expensive to take care of that child in a facility than it is in the home. And where are they going to get better care than with their parents in most instances, in every instance, for the most part? Pam Harris, well, Susie Watts first, has a daughter who's completely unable to take care of herself. She's in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the neck down. And she was in a group that was affected by this Blagojevich executive order, and immediately upon him signing that executive order, she was forced to pay $800 a year to the Service Employees International Union to take care of her own daughter in her own home. That's right. You know, the issue of unions in America, the issue of compulsory unions in America, going all the way back to 1935 and the Roosevelt administration and the threat to pack the court to impose this on us nationally, those are stories that we can look at and we can think of and say, you know, that's probably wrong. But to tell a story about Susie Watts and Pam Harris, two mothers who want nothing more to take care of their own children in their own home, being forced to pay a fee to a union, to a private organization for the privilege of doing that, is the best evidence of why right to work is the right thing to do. Let's talk a little bit about right to work, and I'll continue that story of Pam Harris because it's got a nice ending. But we don't have to go there yet. I got to make you mad first, then I'll tell you that we have it. That's it. It's like church, you know. I'm going to tell you about all the bad things, and I'm going to tell you how you can solve all those bad problems. But right to work is a very simple issue. We believe that every worker in America should have the right to join a labor union. That's a fundamental right. If you want to associate with a private organization, be it the Tea Party or the AFL-CIO, in America, we don't stop you from doing that. We allow you to do that. It's freedom of association. It's right in the Bill of Rights. It's one of those things that the founders of this country said, we're going to take this off the table. We're not going to let politicians and those that would be in politics play around with certain things. And the right to associate was one of them. In order to have the right to associate, though, logic tells us you must have the right not to associate. The corollary right to refuse to associate must exist if the right to associate exists. In American labor policy, we've stood that notion on its head. You know, in ordinary transactions between us, Steve and I can make an agreement to do something together. We can make a deal to do business together. In ordinary business terms, in ordinary agency relationships, there are elements that must exist in order for us to have an agreement. Contracts. No lawyers in the room, hopefully, right? Good. Okay. So we'll make this real simple. The elements of a contract are a meeting of the minds. You have to agree as to what it is we are going to do with each other or for each other. There has to be consideration. There has to be an exchange of value between the two of us. There has to be no duress. I mean, Steve can't grab me by the arm and twist it and say, you will do what I tell you to do. And it has to be legal. Those are really the four elements of a contract in American common law precedent, jurisprudence. In labor law, though, we allow a private organization to force you to give up your right to represent yourself, to force you to associate with them, to do things that you may oppose, that you don't agree with, where there is no meeting of the minds, do it with duress, and that duress being a condition of your employment. In 26 states across this country, ladies and gentlemen, workers are fired not because they're great workers, not because they're bad workers, not because they're black workers or white workers or red workers or yellow workers or redskins. They're fired because they don't tender $38 a month to a private organization for the privilege of working. In a country founded on the grand idea of individual freedom, of individual rights, in a country founded on the principle of self-government, that there are certain rights, unalienable rights is how we say that. Unalienable means you cannot lien those rights. They are not subject to any power of government. They're unalienable. We say unalienable, but it's unalienable. That's a legal term that says they can't be captured. They can't be taken. They're unalienable. And so here we are in 1935, Franklin Roosevelt, after the Great Depression, he finally decides that we're going to nationalize labor policy in America. And prior to 1935, labor unions in America were voluntary institutions. Samuel Gompers, the founder of the AFL, said, the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else is a menace to their rights. And Gompers knew that when workers came together voluntarily, the structure was inherently stronger than anything that would be forced together through compulsion. We understand that. You're not here because of compulsion. You're here voluntarily. That's what makes the Tea Party group in Mechanicsville so powerful that literally shook the foundations of Washington, D.C. just about 2 months ago. You did that. You did it voluntarily. You weren't there. You were in the 4th District. So get out of here. These guys did that. That's right. That's okay. Good deal. Good deal. But the bottom line is you did that because you wanted to, not because you had to. Not because you were forced to. Not because something was conditioned upon you doing that. You did it because you chose to. And ladies and gentlemen, the people of America, not only just America, but people around the world heard, saw, and felt the impact of what you did right here in the 7th District of Virginia. If we'd have forced you to do it, it would have been nearly as powerful. If we'd have forced you to pay for it, it never would have happened. But in American labor policy today, our federal government says that a private organization can force you into unions. And ladies and gentlemen, I would propose to you that the union movement has trouble today in America. They do. They're losing members. And the reason why they're losing members is because they rely on government power as opposed to the voices of the workers they claim to represent on the shop floor. They're more interested in what happens in Richmond, in Washington, D.C., in Springfield, Illinois, because their power is a resident of government action. They've been granted the privilege to force themselves on people, and so when you have a business model like that, you've got to work like the Dickens to play politics to make sure you can keep it. It's very difficult for them to sell their product to America's workers now. I mean, in secret ballot elections where workers get to go behind a curtain and say yes or no for unions, unions don't even want to do that anymore. They want to force you to sign a card with 3 guys on your front porch at 11 o'clock at night saying, sign the card, sign the card. Little do you know that card means you just voted for the union. But I'm digressing here. I get excited about this. I apologize. I came from a union household. The union household, my stepfather was a 32 member of the International Association of Machinists. He was a welder. And my mom worked in a school cafeteria, washing dishes. She was forced to pay due. My brother's a 4th grade teacher now in the New York school system. He has to pay a fee in order to teach in New York State. So 1935 comes along. The delegates of the AFL-CIO say, you know, it'd be kind of a neat thing if we could get the government to take care of this for us. And sure enough, Roosevelt pushes what's called the Wagner Act. The National Industrial Recovery Act that came out of the Depression was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. They said, the Constitution doesn't give us the power to impose this federal mandate on the states as it relates to labor policy. Well, Roosevelt had an interesting idea, and it was the case involving the Wagner Act that established forced unions in America, where Roosevelt went to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and he said, you know, you guys are pretty old. There are 6 of you here that are over 70, and that's pretty old. That's really not that old. I'm getting close. So that's, that's quite young, as a matter of fact. Yeah, we think that's quite young. I think it's much younger every year.
Yes.
70 is much younger every year. So the Supreme Court, and he says, I think that all the justices on the Supreme Court need to have an apprentice first. So if you're over 70, we're going to give you an associate judge that will work with you. And so at the time, there were 6 justices over age 70, and so Roosevelt was prepared to add 6 new justices to the U.S. Supreme Court to take it from 9 to 15. Because he had a lot of work he had to get done, and he was afraid that the current Supreme Court was not going to approve many of these programs. And he was right. The Supreme Court, the Chief Justice said, we see no difference between what we just struck down and what now is proposed by Congress. And we think that it's going to be unconstitutional. So Roosevelt twists an arm and says, you appreciate the integrity of the court and the traditions of the court, don't you, Mr. Chief Justice? Well, of course he does. So on this act, on this particular litigation, and one litigation before it, you might have heard the old idiom, a switch in time saves 9. That was this case. Supreme Court Chief Justice changed his position. They upheld the constitutionality of the National Labor Relations Act, and from that point forward, the federal government has allowed union officials to force workers into these collectives, force them to associate, and ultimately force them to pay dues as a condition of employment. So from 1935 to 1947, you can only guess what happened to the union movement. They blossomed. They grew. They had unbelievable power. In fact, they used that power in World War II. John L. Lewis, the president of the United Mine Workers, threatened to shut down the mining industry in the country unless he got his demands met, right during the time when we're trying to build tanks and things to support the war effort. After 1945, after the end of the war, 14 million Americans were on strike in America. 14 million. The country was in chaos because of this incredible power of organized labor. Well, 1947 comes around. The elections of 46 are a dramatic change in Congress. 1947, then Senator Robert Taft from Ohio says, we probably went a little far back in 1935 with this union power. We ought to do something about that. So he introduced what's called the Taft-Hartley Act in 1947. And the Taft-Hartley Act went in, and instead of gutting and repealing this federal authorization for forced unionism and sending it back to the ash heap where it belonged and allowing states to continue to manage labor relations, they said, well, we'll just tinker with it. How many times have we seen that, ladies and gentlemen? We set up a program, we try to reform it, and all they do is literally it's like a tick on a hound dog. It just gets tighter and tighter and bigger and fatter and fatter. And unfortunately, government doesn't blow up, but ticks do eventually, I guess. I don't know the answer to that. But anyway, here's the point. In 1947, they said, okay, we'll let all this stand. We'll let the bias in federal law be in favor of compulsion, but we'll allow states to outlaw forced unionism if they can do it by affirmative action. So from 1947 to today, 24 states have passed what are called right-to-work laws. And right-to-work laws are very simple. They say that you can work in America at a place of employment and not have to pay a fee to a private organization for the privilege. That's all they say. They don't stop one worker from joining, one worker from paying dues, one worker from asking someone to represent them. It doesn't stop any of that. It simply says you can't be forced to pay a fee in order to work. Pam Harris and Susie Watts in Illinois are the best case study of the manifestation of that. If the government can force a mother to pay a fee to a private organization to take care of her own child in her own home, we've gone too far. We've gone too far. Governor Blagojevich, who now still has public housing, it's a different kind of public housing.
Yeah,
He's a public housing guy. Yeah, we're still paying for his public housing. That's right. Even we're paying for that public housing now. That's right. The people in Illinois paid for it first. Now we're all paying for it. But his predecessor, Governor Pat Quinn, signs another executive order saying expanding this power of organized labor to a whole other group of personal care providers. These ladies come to the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, which has been in business since 1968, with its sole mission, the only thing we do is represent employees whose rights have been violated by compulsory unionism. Since 1968, we've represented literally, I think, over 500,000 employees in litigation at every level of government, small claims court to the U.S. Supreme Court. We've been to the U.S. Supreme Court 17 times. And on June 30th of this year, which many of you may recognize and many of you not, that is the last day of the Supreme Court term for this term, they came down with a decision called Harris versus Quinn. Quinn being Governor Pat Quinn, Harris being Mother Pam Harris. The Supreme Court heard oral arguments in this case on January 21st of this year. Our lawyer went, Pam Harris couldn't come because her son needs constant attention. 7 of the other clients came, and they sat in the highest court in the land in the United States, and they listened as lawyers back and forth talked about their ability to take care of their children in their own home with the 9 justices of the court. They walked out that day, and the TV cameras were there, and the microphones, and Susie Watts stands up and says, "Well, how do you feel?" She says, "Well, I don't really know what to say here. I mean, this is, we're just 2 ordinary people, my husband and I, and our daughter is just a special person in our life, obviously, and to think that the highest court in the land has taken an hour to hear our case is really something that's inspiring to us." And no matter what we think about America and the condition of this country, no matter what we think about that and how bad we think things are, there are moments in the structure of this country that allow us to say there is hope and there is opportunity. When Pam Harris and 7 other plaintiffs can get their case from the local federal court, the lowest level of federal court, to the highest court of the land, and then on June 30th, win the case, and strike down this scheme that is now metastasized to over 18 states and protect nearly 2 million home health care providers and personal care providers in the country, we know there's a chance. We ought to be inspired by their courage, just like the people of America are inspired by yours. And I'm inspired by yours. The opportunity to stand up and participate in our government of we the people in the country is something that is unique in history.
That's right.
And for us, and for you specifically in the Tea Party, your response to the establishment in Washington, the Republicans and the Democrats, and frankly, I don't even keep track of who's an R or who's a D anymore.
That's right.
I really don't.
That's right.
It doesn't matter.
That's
It doesn't matter. The only thing they respond to is what you guys bring to them, and that is accountability. You mentioned it. The mission of the Tea Party, bringing accountability. It was Jefferson that said, the only way this country can survive, is if we stay informed. If we are educated about our government, if we're educated about what they're doing, and we're watching, and we're vigilant, and we're involved. If we are not, human nature, being what it is, I have 6 children. I have seen human nature in its rarest and basest form. I can tell you. I got 5 daughters. That makes it even worse. They're growing up now, too. That makes it even worse. Double worse. Triple worse. But I will tell you, if we don't stay involved and stay informed, then we will lose our government, we will lose our country, and we will lose what has been the grandest experiment in individual freedom the world has ever known. At Right to Work, we get to play a small role in that. We're out there lobbying, we've been involved. We passed 2 new Right to Work laws in the last 2 years. Believe it or not, Michigan is a Right to Work state. The home of the United Auto Workers passed a law that said everyone who wants to join a union, you go do that. If you want to pay union dues, you go do that. If you want them to spend your money on politics that you agree with, you go do that. But don't force anyone else who may disagree with that. Force them to lose their job because they disagree. Indiana passed a Right to Work law in February 2012. Right to Work's coming to the Rust Belt. We knew that if we could pass a Right to Work law in Indiana, we started 10 years before it passed. 10 years we passed. The first battle, of course, was with the Democrats. They were in charge, and they don't want anything to do with Right to Work because about 95 to 98% of all the union political cash goes to one political party. And I can tell you, I do keep track of that because it has a D after it. It doesn't have an R after it. Not that it matters, but they're all in for one party. So all this money goes to elect them. So we had to fight. What we did in Indiana is we got a recorded vote. Something very simple. You know what politicians hate more than anything? What do you think they hate most more than anything?
Right,
recorded votes, that's right. Our gentleman from the 4th District knows that. He knows that. They hate recorded votes. Why do they hate recorded votes? Because they hate accountability. And I heard tonight the word accountability as the final statement of your mission of why you're doing what you're doing, and that's exactly right, it's accountability. We got our vote, we lost. Everyone said, well, you lost. Don't have a vote if you're going to lose. Come on. On issues like this, we lose all the time. I'm probably the biggest loser that you'll ever meet in politics. I've lost more legislative battles than anyone you'll ever meet. Because we do about 100 of them a year, and we lose about 100 of them a year. Except when we don't. We pass a Right to Work law in Michigan, we pass one in Indiana. That's kind of cool. We got a recorded vote. We use that vote to tell the Hoosiers about who was for freedom and who was for coercion. Very simple. Very simple message. Freedom, coercion, you sort them out. Well, they did. Republicans took control of the legislature. Now who do you think we're fighting? The Republicans. Governor Mitch Daniels. Everyone thinks Mitch Daniels is this great manager, You know, Mitch Daniels, we actually had the votes in 2010. We finally had all the votes we needed to pass it, Everybody knew it. The only person that was against us at that point was Governor Mitch Daniels with an R behind his name. He said, we're not going to do right to work. In fact, it turned out, once he turned tail and came on our side, we put pressure on him, the unions produced 2 videos and 3 letters from Mitch Daniels that said, during the 7 years he'd been governor, saying, don't worry, as long as I'm here, they'll never get right to work. You know? We chased Mitch Daniels around the country because there was a trial balloon that he might be a good president. He could not speak anywhere in the country without a right-to-work activist. Chasing him around, asking him about right to work. He attacked us nationally. He was on a national television show. He said, those right-to-work people, they're just crazy. You know, that's what they say about you.
Yes.
That's what they're going to say about this black guy when he wins a congressional seat. You know? But that's okay. We may be crazy, but we win. That helps. So in Indiana, we finally got to the point where we finally had to go after the Republicans. We finally got it done, and it was a matter of, the unions marched on it. The longest legislative walkout in American history, ladies and gentlemen, where the legislatures left the state. It wasn't Wisconsin. It wasn't over Scott Walker's reforms of the bargaining laws there for public employees. It was in Indiana when we were passing the right-to-work law. 35 days they left. 35 days. The legislature would gavel in each morning. No quorum was present. They did nothing for 35 days. How important is forced unionism to organized labor? Do they do that over taxes? No. Do they do it over guns? No. Do they do it over pro-life? No. They do it over anything but their funding mechanism, which is compulsory unions and power. Right to work is not a marquee issue. You guys, no reason for you to get excited about right to work. But I would suggest this. I would propose to you that if you look at the funding sources of the people that are taking away our liberties, and we just did a study, it'll be released next week, it's a correlation study between union contributions and the biggest tax and spenders in Washington. I will tell you it is a 100% correlated analysis that the biggest recipients of organized labor's money have the lowest taxpayer support votes from NTU and various other tax rating groups. The very lowest. You just match it up. Because government is really what they're after. You know that the government unions are now really the power of organized labor. It's not the private sector unions anymore. We're down to about 6.6% of the private sector workforce that's unionized in America. We're about 35% of the government workforce across the country. Up until last year, more than half of all union members in America were government employees. Think about that. They weren't steel workers. They weren't working in manufacturers. They were working in governments in the 50 state capitals in Washington, D.C. You think about that for a minute. Franklin Roosevelt, when asked in 1937 whether or not he thought, while they just unionized the private sector with the Wagner Act, why don't we do it in the public sector? Roosevelt wrote a letter back to a union official saying, it's unthinkable that we would unionize government. It's unthinkable we would do that. It's just not the same. 1959, the AFL-CIO Executive Committee puts out a statement saying that we're not going to unionize government employees. We have no more rights than ordinary citizens have to redress their government. And if you look at what we've done with organized labor in government, we've put them between taxpayers and our government. They're here. They're above ordinary citizens in the redress of their government. That's wrong. It shouldn't be that way. The good news is, 1993 in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we had a bill that passed the legislature, the House of Delegates, passed the state Senate. It said the state of Virginia will not recognize union officials for purposes of bargaining over any employee in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Who signed that bill in 1993?
Wilder.
Yep.
Doug Wilder. There it is. Best governor Virginia's had, in my mind. Doggone that guy. He signed a bill. We're one of 2 states that actually statutorily prohibit the recognition of unions for purposes of bargaining for our employees. And that manifests itself in a decent financial picture for Virginia. Other people think we're in great shape, but CNBC talks about us as one of the best financially run states in the country for the last 10 or 15 years. I would propose to you that our ability to control the power of organized labor in the government sector is one of those reasons why that's the case. You look at New York, you look at California, you look at Illinois. We are now at a point, ladies and gentlemen, where states are teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. We're teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. We're teetering on the edge of retirees, government employees who've given their life of service, policemen, firefighters, teachers. They've done all this. They've done this with a promise, and when they go to retire, there's going to be nothing left for them. We're going to break our promises to those people because organized labor asked for so much, and politicians who were elected with the money that was raised through this compulsory unions of power gave them what they wanted, and now we can't sustain it. There's trouble ahead in the government sector. Fortunately, it may not happen in Virginia, and we have some control over our government sector. But in those other states, we're not sure what's going to happen. Look at Detroit. I guess yesterday or 2 days ago, they announced that creditors are going to get 26 cents on the dollar. retirees are going to get 26 cents on the dollar. You know, I think that's, I mean, not sure that's going to happen with all the pensions, but it's pretty likely there's not much left there to deal with. They were riding high for a while, but those chickens came home to roost, and those promises that were made were unsustainable. And it was the power of organized labor officials to manipulate the elected officials that they negotiate with through their political campaigns from the compulsory unions in power to put this whole thing together, and it's kind of spinning apart. There's so much to be done on this front, but it's simple. You guys can help. We have a National Right to Work Act that is currently pending in Congress. Randy Forbes is not a co-sponsor of that bill yet. He ought to be. Dave Bratt promised that he would support a right to work bill if he made it to Congress. Eric Cantor wouldn't tell us where he would stand. I sat down with Eric Cantor. We went to talk to him when he was in his leadership office. We had called a meeting with him, and he allowed us to come in. It took us, I think, probably 25 or 30 days to get a meeting to go talk to His Honor. And we went to the Capitol building, you know, and these places are designed to intimidate us. You know, that's why they put marble in Washington and cherry and gold leaf. You know that, right? It's not because they're really, I guess they like it too. But when we come to Washington, they want us to look around and go, wow.
You see what difference is saying?
What's that? Yeah, they want us to look around and be awed by the material accoutrements of the Capitol and all that. They do that so we don't pay attention to what they do. And so we sat down with Eric Cantor and we asked him a very simple question. We said, Leader Cantor, we would like you to co-sponsor the National Right to Work Act. He'd been a co-sponsor before. He said, not going to do it. I don't co-sponsor anything now. I said, wait a minute. You're the leader, right? You're part of the leadership team. How does the caucus know what it is that you want to do from a goal standpoint if you're not co-sponsoring any legislation? So, well, we've just decided not to co-sponsor any legislation. I said, well, that doesn't really sound like leadership to me. Things got frosty at that point. And really not much left to say. He walked out.
He should have listened.
Yeah, well, he might have. Yeah, he might have. But he should have listened to you guys is what he should have done. Not us.
Did that include listen to us either?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Here's the problem. How much is he making a year now?
He's making money. He ought to thank you guys.
Okay.
Yeah. He ought to put something in the kettle.
Did that include Boehner? Boehner also decided?
Boehner never likes us. He doesn't like. We can't even get to see him. He doesn't even like us.
Well, what about sponsoring legislation?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know about Boehner. I mean, I can't attest that Cantor never co-sponsored legislation. I think he probably did. I should have gone back and checked it. But there's no reason to fight with a guy that's turned that way. Yeah. I mean, but so the point is that we as citizens, and right to work in specifically, is an issue that we ought to pay attention to. We've got a bill pending in the United States Congress. We're going to be really mad at me because we got federal legislation to solve the problem. You say, Mark, what are you thinking about? Right? That's what you should be thinking. Somebody say that. Mark. Ooh, thank you. I was worried there for a minute. Our bill is one page, and no one takes that seriously anymore. It's got to be 2,300 pages, and you can't read it if you're going to take it seriously. You won't know what you've got until you pass it, right? One-page bill does not add one single word to federal law. Not one word. It simply goes into the original Federal Labor Relations Act, National Labor Relations Act, and it repeals those provisions that authorize union officials to have someone fired for failure to pay dues or fees. We take the bias of federal law from compulsion to voluntarism. It's that simple. It's that simple. We don't necessarily support the federal law. We'd like to go back to what we were before, where states could manage their labor relations, and you could see, regular through the regular court system, as opposed to this massive creation of agency law that runs contrary to everything we know as a common law practitioner, precedent. So we don't add a single word to federal law, but we can't get the Republicans to give us a recorded vote on that. What do you think? Wouldn't that be a nice vote? One-page bill, freedom versus coercion. Let's sort them out. You tell us, you tell your constituents you're willing to continue to force workers to pay dues to get or keep a job. You tell them that Pam Harris ought to pay a private organization for the privilege of taking care of her child in her home. Or you can tell them that you support unionism, it just has to be voluntary. What a great vote. John Boehner won't give us that vote. In fact, one time we were having a hearing on the bill. We actually had a hearing. We had some members of Congress who wanted to put on a hearing because we couldn't get a hearing from the Congress. We told them we could bring back, we had 20 workers who'd been fired because they didn't pay union dues that wanted to come back and sit in front of a microphone with a camera and say, you don't think this is real? my life's been changed because of forced unionism. They wouldn't let us do that. So we went up, we held this pseudo hearing. We actually sat in the, you know how they have those elevated desks, the DI, I forget what DIAS is or whatever they're called. Apparently someone in the leader's office was looking, and the speaker's office was looking at us, and they saw the video of us sitting in the chairs at these. They immediately rushed in and said, you can't sit in those chairs. So we had to go get tables and set the tables up in the middle of a floor. This is the Republican leadership, mind you. We're giving them an issue on a golden plate to distinguish themselves from the other side, and they won't take it.
Reason.
I don't get too upset about it. We just keep pushing on. We just
Well,
keep
another
pushing,
150 need to go.
just like you. We just keep
Yeah.
pushing on. That's right.
And what's the reason? Did they get union support also?
Well, Eric Cantor, if you recall, right before the election, right before you guys did what you did, there was a rumor that Eric Cantor was going to fly down to Miami to a very posh hotel and attend an event that the unions had funded completely with this Main Street Republican group run by Steve LaTourette, who's a former congressman from Ohio, who now works for the unions. The unions put about $8 million into this PAC. They use it to support Republicans who support compulsory unionism. And Cantor was going to attend that meeting. We ran a picture of the hotel in our newsletter where Eric Cantor said, will Cantor attend? We sent that out to about 1.5 million people by email, telling them to contact Eric Cantor and say he's not going. He decided not to go, but I think Kevin McCarthy, the number 2, or now the number 2, then the number 3 went, I think. You know, it just really doesn't make any sense. Those are the kind of things they do. But so we've got a bill, and we got to get Randy Forbes on that bill. It is Senate Bill 204 and House Bill 946. That's it. We've got 117 co-sponsors in the House. We've got 27, I think, in the Senate now. But those are people that are willing to stand up for freedom versus coercion. And generally, you know, we've got Whitman, we've got Rigel, we've got Goodlatte, we've got Griffith, we've got Wolf on the issue. Comstock has indicated she'll support us. Brett has answered the survey 100% saying he would support right to work if he makes it to Washington. So good news from here, but we got to get Randy Forbes on the bill. He'd been on it before. But we just can't let him slip away like this and get used to not doing these things. You got to continue to hold him accountable. We got another bill that is just amazing. We talked a little bit about this earlier before we started tonight. There's actually a bill. Well, let me take you to this story. Louisiana, 1970 probably, 1970. Major strike, construction industry strike, violence everywhere. Union officials order a couple of their snipers out to shoot out transformers, electrical transformers near this construction site to knock out the power and knock it out for some time. A couple of the employees come to the courts. They say, you know, we need to stop this. They try to prosecute the union officials for this coordinated campaign of violence with this unionized company. And the Supreme Court of the United States in 1973 ruled in a case called Evans that union officials can't be prosecuted under federal law for acts of violence. I'm quoting, I do this because I'm quoting the Supreme Court brief. Can't be prosecuted under the Hobbs Act for acts of violence that are used to achieve legitimate union objectives. If all of us went out tonight and I said, okay, we're going to go down to the Bell Cafe, we're going to break the windows, and we're going to intimidate the owner until he agrees to unionize the waiters and waitresses, we could be prosecuted under the extortion law by the Department of Justice. I suspect Eric Holder would do that. Probably prosecute us, I suspect. But we would be subject to prosecution under the Hobbs Act. If union officials did it, if the Bell Cafe was unionized and they went down there and said, we want a raise, and they broke the windows and beat up all the employees, and I was a union official who told you to go down and do that, we couldn't be prosecuted under that law. There's a case in Philadelphia right now, in the courts. If you don't believe me, go check it out. Because sometimes people say, that can't be true. It can't be true. Well, there's a case in Philadelphia right now where the Ironworkers Union was worried that a Mennonite church was being built without union labor. So what'd they do? They coordinated a campaign, they went up, they burned the church down, they put sugar in all the gas tanks, they destroyed all the construction equipment, and the night that that happened, the union president shoots an email out to a couple of the guys that are perpetrators saying, nice hit. This is part of the court record. What do the unions use as a defense? They say, you can't prosecute us for this because Edmunds says we are exempt from prosecution. The judge says, well, he ruled just within the last 2 weeks, I think it was. He said, well, Edmunds may provide protection, but you went after a company that was non-union. If they'd have been union, you'd have been exempt. But because they're non-union, you're not achieving a legitimate union objective other than intimidating these people. So therefore, we're going to continue the prosecution. They will appeal, the unions will appeal, and they will use the Edmunds decision as their defense.
So it will go to the Supreme Court?
Hopefully it will. Hopefully it will. We hope that it could go to the Supreme Court and they can take a look at this again, because this is really weird. We've got two bills. We've got a bill in the House, bill in the Senate there. Paul Brown, the congressman from Georgia, you may know that name. House Bill 2021 is out there. We have a few number of co-sponsors there. We'd like to get our Virginia congressman on that. And it's House Bill 2021. It's called the Freedom from Union Violence Act. And then David Vitter from Louisiana sponsored the Senate bill, which is 2535. And we'd like to continue support for that too. So there's some couple of action items for you. What I'd like you to take away from this talk about right to work, and I want to answer questions about it. I'll be glad to answer questions about right to work. That's the only thing in the world that I'm an expert on. You can ask my wife. She'll tell you. That's the only thing he's an expert on. And I'm not really even an expert on that. But I would leave you with this. I would leave you with this. Right to work and the issue of compulsory unions may not have an impact on us here in Virginia. It may not have an impact on you. It may not be something that you're even the slightest bit interested in. But I can tell you this power of a private organization to get government to defend their ability to force you to pay them money to keep a job changes our political system.
Yes.
It alters the political structure and the power.
But it does affect us here in Virginia. We're taxpayers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Government contracts, for instance.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I don't mean to say that to mitigate it, but you know, it's not in our face in Virginia because no one can be fired for failure to pay dues or fees to keep their jobs. They can be intimidated. They can be coerced, they can be convinced that it's in their best interest, but they can't be compelled.
What was the recent one down at, what was it, Charleston, South Carolina? It's a
Boeing.
contract down there?
Yeah,
Was it
Boeing. Yeah.
And they
We ended up
contract-
representing the employees at the Boeing plant down there. We were actually their lawyers. The union wouldn't represent them, the government wouldn't represent them, the company didn't want anything to do with it, so we ended up representing the employees in South Carolina who were going to lose their jobs if the National Labor Relations Board could tell Boeing where they could build a facility. We just won the case on behalf of the Volkswagen workers in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We represented them as well. In that case, Volkswagen, if you're buying Volkswagen, think again. I didn't say that. You take that, Steve, take that off the table. I just announced a boycott. No, I'm kidding. Volkswagen in Chattanooga. Volkswagen company, management from Germany, they're very comfortable with unions over there. They have unions on their board of directors. They're required by law to have this representation on their board. They came to Chattanooga, they sited a facility there to build a Passat, which is one of their top-selling vehicles. They're manufacturing it there, they're exporting it, they're selling it here in the United States. It was the J.D. Power Car of the Year, of course, in a certain class. Is every car a J.D. Power Car of the Year?
I think so.
Yeah, I can never figure it out. I don't ask too many questions. I just assume that trophy means something. You know. Anyway, I digress. The company there was ready to force the workers into a union without their consent. The union announced one day that they had a majority of workers that had signed a card saying they wanted a union to represent them. A bunch of workers got on the phone, our phone lines burned up at Right to Work and said, "This is wrong, nobody wants this, nobody wants this." We ended up representing the employees, we filed unfair labor practice charges against United Auto Workers, questioning the integrity of the card they had signed and how they got them signed. Then Volkswagen's management says, well, if you don't unionize the company, you're not going to get the new crossover SUV that they're going to build in the United States. If an employer said something like that in a union drive that was against the union, he would have been in court so fast and had so many violations of labor law thrown at him that he would have not been able to unpack that box for months. But when Volkswagen says we want the union down there and we're going to threaten you with future jobs, they created unfair labor, so we filed a charge against them too. Well, the union never showed anyone these cards. Never showed anyone. Not the press, not the company, not the NLRB, not anybody that inquired. Not us, because they didn't have the cards. They just made the statement, we have a majority. So once the unfair labor practices were filed, the company decided to have a secret ballot election. They let the workers get behind a curtain, give a thumbs up or a thumb down, in private, without anyone looking, and the union lost the election. They lost the election. We're still representing those employees. They're still our clients. We were able to get that secret ballot election because of what was going on down there. But no one was going to defend those workers. So in Boeing and in Volkswagen, the foundation has been there for those employees. We sued both the company and the union there. And the employees down there, they're going to form a union. They probably will have a union, but they'll do it on their terms, not anyone else's. And that's the way it ought to work. And Tennessee's a right-to-work state. The good news there is no one can be compelled to pay dues or fees to keep their jobs at Volkswagen because of the right-to-work protections. But it will be a stronger union because they're in a right-to-work state. Because the workers, they will pay attention to what's happening on the floor because they've got to earn the trust of the union officials. They've got to earn their money day in and day out. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're I see a small business shirt right there. You don't provide good customer service, guess what happens?
No sales.
In the union movement, you get the money no matter what. when you have compulsory use. It's an issue that we ought to pay attention to. It's an issue we ought to hold our politicians accountable on, and it's a really simple issue. It's not complex. They will try to throw all this talk in there about right to work, and at the end of the day is, why do you need to force workers to join you if you're doing good things for workers? It's that simple. Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate coming. I appreciate talking about this, as you might be able to tell. I get excited about it. I've been doing it for 27 years. My first job was with Herb Bateman when he represented the 1st District, which was all the way up to Caroline County. Sarah's Pancake House, I was up there. That precinct used to be in the 1st District. Now it's Bobby Scott's. I traveled through the Upper Peninsula, the Middle Peninsula, all the way up around here, through here. Of course, I don't think we had this part. We didn't have this part of the state. But we did have Caroline County and all that. So I got to know Frog Level, went to the parade there, blow up the rooms there, you know, Frog Level. Frog Level. You see me on the side of the firehouse truck is really neat. Leveling the frog. You appreciate those things in America. So I've got Virginia. I grew up in New York, but I'm a Virginian by choice now. And I'm proud to be a Virginian. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've done. I'm proud of your getting up, getting involved, holding politicians accountable, and seeing results. I believe it wasn't easy. It is not easy. It's not supposed to be easy. But you did it. With energy and fortitude and with shoe leather and with telephone calls and with knocking on doors and just doing what Americans do to preserve who we are and what we are as a country. So let me thank you for that work. The outcome didn't really matter. The fact that you changed the hearts and minds and scared the living out of a lot of folks in Washington. You changed their behavior. You don't have to beat all these guys. You just have to let them know that you can rough up one or two, and they change their position on things. You've made a difference in America, and I thank you for that. So thank you for the opportunity to be here.